Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Sami Gardner, and we're going to be talking about smart developer career strategies and also how women can get ahead in tech. And we're going to look at how you can create having your ideal job over a few years with a strategy, which many people don't even think about. So there's some new stuff in there. And also, we're going to have a look at some of the consequences of how tech careers are currently set up or how they're not set up. We'll also look at some of the gender confidence differences between men and women when applying for jobs and doing projects, how to deal with not being listened to in meetings, job title roulette, and how she deals with the desire for job stability versus risk. Also, we'll look at how to deal with being discouraged from going into tech when you're in school. So welcome, Sami.
Hi, thank you, Michael. I'm glad to be on.
I'm glad you're here too. And for those of you who don't know her, she is a career stagnation stopper. So she helps people come up with smart strategies for career, mainly in the tech field. So, and she is involved in tech herself. So let's have a look at that. You know, it may not have occurred to people listening that you even could have a career strategy. So what exactly is that? Why would you want to have it?
Okay, well, you want a strategy because in 2017, we have come to a point in this post-Uber job market where a lot of the advice that everybody learned in school, where you're supposed to find the manager, shake his hand, look him in the eye, that kind of advice doesn't really work anymore. Because one, you might not find the manager. Two, the company might not have a physical location. So we're dealing with the fact that finding a job is now globalized, we're also dealing with the fact that this is the most educated generation by far. It is a bare minimum to be hardworking, incompetent, and skilled and have a degree. That's like saying a car has wheels. Nobody's going to buy a car just because it has wheels. Nowadays you have to really position yourself. So when you're thinking about the type of job that you want, how you're going to get there, you have to be strategic, especially when you are in something like tech where people want to get into tech. It's lucrative, it's in an office, it's very much cerebral. It's not something where you are out of the industry if you mess up your back. So there's a lot of reasons why people want to be in tech, and you have to be more than just one of the resumes in a pile. You can't be that when there could be not just 300, not just like 700, but 1,000 resumes in that pipeline. How do you stand out?
So having a strategy is deciding where you want to be in a few years' time, and then kind of planning backwards on how you're going to get there. Is that part of it, or?
Yes, and it does have to do with your personality. In some ways, I am very intuitive. So for me, I was able to determine the type of skills that I wanted to use. I really like using tech skills. I really like collaboration, and I like community. So throughout my career, I have gravitated towards positions that were like that. I let serendipity lead me in some cases as well. I mean, I got into tech after, being a career specialist, after a career as a librarian, so I have been strategic, but there's also been a bit of serendipity. So depending on your personality, you might need to reverse engineer a couple years along the line. Or you might be somebody who kind of goes with your gut and knows that, okay, I like doing this. How do I continue to do this in different ways?
So if you were being strategic and you wanted to work for a particular company, what kind of things might you do in order to get there?
Okay, so one thing to think about is that, let's say you want to work for Google. You want to work for Google as maybe a UX designer. One thing to think about is that you can reverse engineer that process. Go onto LinkedIn. They have an advanced search bar, and you can literally look up what a UX designer at Google, what they've done, what's their background, what have they learned. And you can really take that as sort of a guiding point. Okay, if I'm going to be in this position, I need to get this kind of skill set. Where a lot of people go wrong is that they get this idea that it's out of reach, where they have to be full stack or nothing. You can think about what you're going to specialize in, because yes, it might take you a couple years to get to Google, but you can say, okay, along the way, I need to pick up JavaScript. I need to pick up this or that, or I need to be able to get agency experience or corporate experience. And you can plot your course. And the thing is, it doesn't need to be set in stone, because windows and doors, they can open at any time. But if you actually know what you want, you are training your eyes to see opportunities. You know, a lot of people get kind of overwhelmed. You know, they think that they have to be all or nothing. No, you can be really good at that one thing, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's going to be on the Rails, whether it's UI design, and then you can build up from there. You don't need to wait a billion years, take all sorts of different courses, get a bunch of certifications, and then apply. Just start a little by little, network, get to know people, understand that you're not going to get on the job training. This is not going to happen. Most of the time, people want you to be able to hit the ground running. And I got some feelings about that. I don't think that is a very smart mentality that we have in employment nowadays, but it's one that we have. So if you can get over the fear of, maybe not being the quickest guy on the team to code something, but that you can learn one step ahead of the process, then you're going to be able to get there. But a lot of people feel like if they're not going to hit Google, then they shouldn't be in it. There's a ton of awesome startups that will give you a ton of experience that will make you full stack, because they will need you to wear a bunch of different hats. Not that that is particularly the best idea, because full stack is usually something where somebody really should be separating that, because it's not the best, but that's the mentality that we're working on. If you can't be a unicorn, then just be an awesome zebra. Be able to specialize, know your worth, network, and you will find that opportunities open. And maybe that goal of working at Google, that might change. Maybe you might find that instead you end up getting an awesome opportunity to work for Zalando, which is one of Germany's top companies. In tech, you never know where you might get, but you will be able to get there. You just have to set some intention and have some aligned action. And then you'd be surprised once you start greasing the wheels of the universe, what happens.
So by having a back plan of what your ideal job is and seeing what skills you need to get, when a project comes up that you think you could I could do most of that, but I don't know, whatever the skill is, Angular or JavaScript or some specialized ColdFusion thing. But you're I could learn that on the job, on the project. And then you make a choice to go for the projects that get you nearer to your dream job.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it was Richard Branson that said, if somebody gives you an opportunity, say yes. Because sometimes that door, you might not have a social life for about 2 weeks and you're going to spend your time studying, but you're going to get to meet people. You're going to get to actually do the thing. And if you're somebody who learns by doing, which is the case for most of the people in tech I know, then the fact that you're actually doing it on the job is going to help you. And frankly, once you learn one programming language, it's like learning another. It's not going to be as tough as the first time. You know, a lot of people sweat the fact that, oh, I don't know Swift. But if you know Objective-C, it's like knowing Spanish and then being able to work on Portuguese. You're going to have an easier time doing it because you already learned one. A lot of people psych themselves out because they think in tech everybody's perfect. No, half of those guys are Googling stuff. You know, like, they're not, you know, gurus on high. They're using Google just as much as anybody else.
Have you noticed any difference between male and female developers on that issue of being confident that they can go for a job even if they don't have all the skills listed?
Yes, while I do have a percentage of men who really do get nervous about not fitting requirements, I find that in general, of course exceptions, but in general, I find that my female students and clients, they almost need to be 150% of every qualification that it asks for. They almost need to be overqualified before they apply for something. I have guys who are like, I got about 60% of this. I can do it. Why not? I'll learn it in a weekend. You know, so you have that different sort of confidence level, which that's going to be something that can really just decrease somebody's job movement, you know, especially if you're starting out. Because for a junior developer, you almost have to play the networking and numbers game. You know, you just have to send your resume out to a lot of different places. And you have to understand that a lot of job specifications, they are written like they're Christmas lists. It's HR and the team lead, they get together and they're like, okay, wouldn't it be just useful to have this around? You know, half the time, and we've all experienced this if you've had more than one job, where you get on a job and like half the things they ask you about in the interview, you don't even do. You know, I had a position at a university where they made me write an essay on a content records management system that I never even used. I had to write 1,000 words on my experience with the system for a job where I never even touched it after I was hired. You know, there's not a whole lot of communication, especially with larger companies. You know, HR is pretty much getting a bunch of buzzwords and jargon that they feel like they have to jam into a job ad. And it's capitalism, you know, so they want to get the most for as little. I mean, hey, it happens. However that works, and that is something that can be intimidating to a lot of women, also to men. With a lot of male clients, they act really cocky when they're in the interview, and then we talk and I learn about their imposter syndrome and their problems with their girlfriends and all that stuff. But they overcome that to at least seem confident on paper. You know, and then I'll get the 3 a.m. email about, oh my God, what am I doing? Do you have like a quick program that I can use to learn this? And I'm like, here you go, you'll learn it. Drink a lot of Club Mate and call me in the morning. So
what do you see? You mentioned that there's a problem where companies don't provide on-the-job training. What's some of the consequences of that?
Some of the consequences of that is the fact that if you are not providing training for folks, that you are always going to look for the people who already have all that and more, which means you are usually looking for people who are already employed. So that leads to people poaching. You know, they're poaching people from other companies. And then if you tie in the fact that there is discrimination against the unemployed, you find that everybody wants the guy at the next company. You know, even though a lot of times they have to retrain the processes and systems that guy learned over there so he can work here. However, in tech, most people are only lasting like 2 years. I saw this study where they looked at how long people stay at Facebook and Google, and it's on average 2 years, you know, because most people will know that they can double their salary in less than 10 years if they move to different companies, because there are pay caps. So you might get a promotion, but if you were hired in from the outside, you'd be making more than as an internal candidate who has institutional knowledge. That's one of the things that is mind-boggling to me, is where everybody knows that their company needs some sort of institutional knowledge, because there's always some legacy system that only one person knows how to do, but they don't make it. So that is a value. So people don't feel loyal. They know that they can get more money somewhere else. They aren't like given that incentive to grow with the company, to stay with the company. So you have that. And since nobody wants to train up, they have to poach. In tech, this is something where there's enough tech boot camps in colleges and enough, folks who are willing to wheel and deal, that they're going to be fine. In manufacturing technologies, that's where people are going to come to a problem, because you're going to have a bunch of 60-year-old machinists who are going to retire, and there's no one to replace them. So depending on where you are in tech, that's where you're going to feel the pinch of not having that on-the-job training. The sooner that people realize that that is something that you need. Because let's be real, if you don't have an onboarding system, if nobody knows how to navigate your system, then it takes them just as long to feel comfortable and be efficient as it does if you just said, hey, how about we just give you a month or two for us to teach you some of the skills that you need, how our system works. It's the same amount of time, but companies don't want to take that time. Instead, they just want to steal everybody's engineers, and then they wonder, why aren't people loyal? Because you're inherently making it easy for them not to be loyal.
Now, tell me a bit about job titles, because a lot of people starting out in programming, aren't quite sure what to do with job titles, or even aware they could create their own job title.
Yeah. With job titles, we're kind of in a wild west where there is no real standardization. So you can have where you could be somebody with the skills of a UX designer, and that could be called a UX researcher at another team. That could be called a graphic designer in another ad. You also can find that with some companies like Google, for the folks who are the entry level, they will have like engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's only once they get to that higher level non-widgety work that they actually get like a title that says kind of what they're doing. And that makes it difficult for people who are not already kind of locked into the system, where they aren't part of the network. They don't have friends who are developers. They, aren't part of the old boys network or the old whatever network. They won't know. So when they're looking for ads, they're like, okay, my school called this a UX designer. They will lose out on a bunch of positions, or they might think, oh, I'm just supposed to be this level of engineer. They won't know that there's a number of different levels, and in fact, their skill set, if they are, leveling up in tech, that they could go for a higher position or a different position, because nobody knows what they're calling people. And recruiters don't make it easier. Companies don't make it easier when they're like, we need a purple squirrel or a unicorn or a ninja. And you're like, what the hell is this? It sounds like a kid's show, So it makes it intimidating. And also the mentality at play in tech is different. It's part of why there is an interesting generational gap in women in tech, because they've actually done studies of this, where in the 70s and 80s there was more of a parity in genders. And that's why you see that there are women of a certain age who are still in some management positions in tech because they were the ladies who got in the 70s and 80s. And then somehow the 90s hit and women were like, I'm not interested in this. And that's a lot, it seems like, to do with the fact that tech became less of the why and more of the how. So you can even see that in how people used to do lunch and learns, or whatever the company might call it, where in the 70s and 80s, people would be doing stuff, they would be talking about Eastern philosophy and databases, and then you get into the 90s, and it's like, how fast can we crunch out this code, and it's more about the nitty-gritty, which I find unfortunate given our advances in artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I feel like some philosophy is kind of needed with what we're doing. And that's going to be where you're going to find that there's going to be a turn off with people who have more of those, I guess, stereotypical feminine qualities, female socializations, where they want to know about the why. They want to really think about the solutions, when they're thinking about the problems. They're not just like, this is a process, this is a method.
What about, job stability versus risk tolerance?
Oh, yeah. And when it comes to gender parities, that's going to be something that companies kind of do this to themselves, where they wonder why they're not getting more women, or why women are leaving tech after a certain point after they have children. It's because we have it built, there's a desire for job stability. Once somebody has like a family or they plan to have a family, they want to know how much income they're having in, and you're going to find in tech that a lot of recruiters especially are complaining about the fact that they can't fill permanent positions. It's because tech makes freelance rates so awesome. So you can have a day rate that is going to be 4 times higher than the daily rate for a permanent position. So why would somebody go for that permanent position when they can get a better paid freelance position? But freelance contract positions, they end. They can end suddenly. They can be really short term. So you're always on that that cycle of trying to find that next client or connect with that next recruiter. And that can be something where if you want to just grow with a company, when you actually want to be able to get higher up, when you want to grow, you want some stability, that's not as appealing. So there's a lot of how tech makes hiring happen that make it so women, people with families, they aren't going to want to stay locked in. And you also have it where it's not just women. There's also men who are leaving tech because that's not how they want to work. I saw it when part of my background is in library science. We had guys who had been in tech who were getting into the library world because they wanted to have that sort of working environment where they felt more collaborative. It was more thoughtful. There was more stability.
What about one issue I've heard from both women and from some men is that they just don't get listened to in meetings. They may have a clever idea, but they suggest it and no one pays any attention. How do you deal with that, Sami?
That is something that is really common. There's a lot of tech companies and office places that can be really political, where they have kind of a gutless HR and the company culture just, it's on paper, it's not in practice. So for me, one of the things that I've noticed being a woman in tech and just a woman working in general is that sometimes you have to use what I call a man microphone. So most of the time you team up with a guy who's willing to be a collaborator or is an unwitting microphone, and you kind of have him repeat what you're saying, whatever your idea is. So people just pay attention. I mean, depending on how your personality feels, I don't have a whole lot of ego when it comes to my ideas. that can be galling or it can be a relief, you know, to have that sort of amplification. And the thing is, it's not just, you know, your stereotypical, you know, white, straight, cisgendered man. You know, I worked for an AIDS organization, and that was one of the things that was run by gay men. And that was one of the places where I was listened to the least. You know, so it can happen in any environment, you know, and I've also heard from clients and students who are racial or religious minorities that they have had to deal with that as well. And a lot of times that means you have to like go collaborate, figure out your block, get a little bit political, and get enough people on your team who are agreeing with what you say. And then hopefully it might sink into somebody's thick skull, and then you can actually get some progress.
You mentioned earlier that you were discouraged when you were younger to even go into tech when you were in school. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have always grown up, when I was younger, I grew up in more rural areas. So country sort of environments, where we'd be like, you know, 10, 20 years behind mainstream American culture in some ways. So like most girls, you're kind of like, once you're born, you're given a doll and you're like, you're going to learn how to nurture this thing. And I found that in school, I was always somebody who liked to build things. I'm very crafty with my hands, and I like doing that. So I would really go out for things where I wanted to build stuff. I really wanted to do an electronics club, but I was told that because of my scores in math, that wasn't something I should do. I should join the gardening club instead. Those guys weren't doing calculus. They were soldering stuff. I wanted to like make things melt and make a radio, you know? And the thing is with my math scores, I was told not to worry about math because I was a girl, and I was like, cool, I'm a little bit lazy. I don't want to do this, you know? So you find, at least I found, that I was always directed to something more girly or more nurturing. So my inclination to build things, to be into tech, would be suppressed. However, I'm kind of the contrary son of a gun, so I usually found another way to work it. Like if I wasn't going to be allowed to solder things, then by teachers and stuff like that, I found that librarians were really awesome accomplices. So I would ride my bike to the library. This is before everybody had like a computer in their house. Ride my bike to the library, and I would start building websites. So I started doing that around 12, 13. And I even had, by 16, I was peddling WordPress websites to mom and pop shops in my small town. You know, where for some reason they would be like, oh yeah, sure, 16-year-old girl, make us a website. So I would find ways around that. Math was always a continued kind of barrier. So when I got to university level, you know, I kind of was told, your math scores, you're not going to be able to do well in a computer science program. So what I did was that I saw that the library science program had a bunch of tech courses, pretty much database management, making websites for communities. So I just went the library science route. Nowadays, most library schools are called information technology or information systems. And with the rise of big data, you want some techno librarians around, that's for sure. So I got to have like all of my like tech nerdiness and jamming on that, I got to have in the library program, and I was surrounded by pretty much a bunch of women and a couple of guys, but they were the minority for sure. So that's how I worked around it. But then again, you know, if somebody closes a door, just walk through a window or go across the street. You'll find another door there.
That's a great way to deal with obstacles in your career. So is there a reason that companies have difficulty, you know, getting enough women in tech positions? Or?
Yeah, I there's so many awesome programs that companies are enacting, and Google is, Google, Facebook, they're all making programs that some of them go into inner cities and they help young girls of color. They have it where they're going into native reservations. However, when you actually look at who their recruiters go to, and you really think about it by the numbers, the number one school that these tech recruiters, these tech HR people, the headhunters, where they go is Stanford. Stanford, as you might imagine, is not the most diverse school that you've ever seen. It has 3% African American. It was very proud to announce in 2015 that it had finally gotten more than 200 women in its computer science program. So you can have all of the programs in the world, and you can be throwing money after money into after school programs in middle school. But if you are not going to the schools where these girls end up going to college and recruiting there, you are not going to capture them. If you are always going to recruit at the same places where you are actually getting these people when they're juniors to get them into internships, then you can't be surprised that all of your interns look the same because you're going at the same pool. And even when it comes to networking for these junior positions, because once you're not in school, you're no longer going to get internships, So, okay, now you're looking for your juniors, Most of the time, these companies aren't spending the money and the time to post junior positions on job boards because it costs money, and you can just literally go to your devs and say, hey, Steve, who do you know? And then there you go. You got a bunch of free recommendations. So if you're always going to the same universities, you're always asking the same guys who went to that same university who they know, it's going to be the people that they went to college with. And then you ask yourself, why is this always happening to me? Why am I always hiring the same people? It's like if you're dating and you go to the same, bar each time, wondering why you're getting the same person, it's because you're not widening your scope. You're going for the same wells. And if that's your strategy for diversity, you're never going to meet that. It's just not going to happen. So that's why you find that tech, while they have all these programs, they put money hand over fist, things aren't changing because fundamentally they are hiring the same people over and over again.
So we're wrapping up in a few minutes. I'm kind of curious, why are you proud to be a woman involved in tech?
I'm proud to be a woman in tech because tech is everywhere. And when we are racing towards a future where everything can be controlled with a voice, when you have artificial intelligence, virtual reality, you need more perspectives. You need to have somebody else who is there to be like, hey, it's not all the same. I'm also proud to be a woman in tech because I love this stuff. I like helping people work on their careers. I like getting into the back end, of a website and working on it. I still do all that today. I do all my own tech stuff when I build my own freelance, career services. For me, it's just this awesome it's kind of like how I would imagine people felt like in the Wild West days, where you're going on through and you're just seeing like there's so much to discover. So for me, that's fun. I'm like a little monkey. I like learning new things. I like doing new things. I like getting my hands, implementing something. And tech really allows me to do that. And for all the problems there are in tech, it's also a really cool industry. It's full of people who saw Star Trek and, was like, how do we make some of that stuff happen? And I love that. I like that environment. So for me, there's so much that tech is that improves lives, and I'm really grateful to be part of it. I do think that in a world where we're going to be having computers learn everything, we might want to have more perspectives, or else they're going to be learning some of the worst part of humanity as well. So I don't know. I've seen enough sci-fi movies to know that if we don't program these computers right, we're going to have a bunch of HALs running around, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with the smart house that we're trapped in.
Well, that sounds entertaining. So if people want to find you online, what's the best way to do that?
If they want to find me online, they can go straight to my personal domain, which is samigardner.com. That's SAMI Gardner.com. And that will get you the links to my Facebook page, and my LinkedIn and all that good stuff.
Great. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Sami.
Thank you, Michael. I had a really good time.